His name is Overman, powerful. Many years before the time of man, the plant-based life forms of Earth developed a connection with one another that would come to be
Metro
known.
police got the gunmen pinned down, but they got hostages. Lives are at risk, and the police are still waiting for a negotiator or special crimes unit to arrive. But it's...
The world almost ended. Batman, Superman, and Wonder Woman have disappeared, while some have begun stepping in for the trinity of the world's greatest superheroes, helping those who have suffered in the wake of the Infinite Crisis. For Gotham City Police Department veteran Renee Montya, drunk at a bar, she's had her share of funerals lately, just like everyone else. It's been more than enough. In Metropolis, Brewster Gold subdues a villain. To an adoring crowd, the hero was celebrated, but he needs to take a break. After all, even superheroes get thirsty. Meanwhile, Ralph Dibney, whose home was destroyed, is falling apart. He misses his wife who was brutally killed, and as he puts a gun in his mouth, prepared to finally end it all, he gets a message from the funeral home that arranged for his wife's burial. It seems someone has left a message on her tombstone. Steele confronts his niece, Natasha Irons. John chastises her for stealing a suit of powered armor he feels she hasn't earned and isn't ready for. At least not yet. If she wants armor, she can build it herself. In the nation of Kahndaq, Black Adam declares to his people that he has witnessed true evil and must ensure that his nation show the rest of the world how to deal with it. So they have a mission. He will become an ambassador of justice. He will lead by example. He will spread the gospel. May the gods be with them, for they stand no chance in his way. Yet one stands opposed to this. He calls the entire nation one filled with heretics, and threatens to detonate a bomb strapped to his chest. Black Adam throws the bomb safely in the air and tears off the terrorist's arm. He tells the would-be assailant the man only has 3 more chances to tell Black Adam who sent him. In Gotham City, Batman's logo is removed from the bat signal. For the Dark Knight is gone. It's not clear when or if any of the Trinity will ever return. So only one question remains. Are you ready? There's no story in the history of Marvel or DC quite like 52. We're starting off on this note because this particular video, like Seven Soldiers, has to stray a bit from our classic narrative form. Don't get me wrong, I'm not holding back here and never would, because 52 is one of those core series that was deeply influential in making me love comic books to begin with. Along with titles like League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, Ultimate Spider-Man, and a handful of others, 52 made me a fan of comic books for life. So this story means a lot to me, and I want to do it right. Now, at this point we've talked quite a bit about Grant Morrison's time with DC Comics. If you haven't seen them, I do recommend you check out my reviews of Multiversity and Seven Soldiers, which are fun videos totally worth your time. I'll put a card up here in the corner if you're curious. This video of 52 is sort of the third in the Grant Morrison trilogy of deep dives into some of his written work for DC. All of these videos were Patreon requests by Jeremy Renfro, so you can thank him for what has become this sort of long-term giant mini-series. I'm certainly grateful, as they're all very fun to talk about, and I'm happy to have the opportunity to do so. Yet without a doubt, this video is going to be a sort of weird stepchild to the identical twins of Multiversity and Seven Soldiers. Those comics were ones I approached fresh, having not read them before, making videos about them, and kind of fell in love with both during production. 52, well, I've been a fan of this one for years. And the differences run even deeper than that. 52 is no Multiversity or Seven Soldiers. It's not nearly dense, or to be blunt, as smart as either of the stories. And that gets into the core of what 52 is and what it's all about, because this isn't just a Grant Morrison story. 52 is a massive creative collaboration featuring 4 different major writers. With the aforementioned Grant Morrison, we also have Geoff Johns, Greg Rucka, Mark Waid, and Keith Giffen doing an art breakdown for each issue. Now, full stop right there, that's one of the reasons why this comic works so well and gets right into my opening statement of there being no story out there like 52. To date, that's some of the best talent in the industry, and even in the history of DC in general. It's very rare to have any sort of single series out there with this level of talent attached to it, working on it simultaneously. Because we also have to consider all the artists involved with this thing. Joe Bennett, Phil Jimenez, Jurgens, Jamal Igle, Chris Batista, and many, many other big names all work together on this massive, ambitious project, a weekly comic book publication spanning an entire year. 52 issues of content covering the time span between Infinite Crisis and 1 year later, during which, for a full year in DC's in-universe timeline, Superman, Batman, and Wonder Woman were all out of service. In both concepts and plot, the stakes couldn't be any higher. Weekly comics by this time in the North American industry was practically an extinct concept. Outside of webcomics, newspaper print, and a handful of exceptions in the distant past, most major publishers could not pull off a weekly comic book series. The reasons why are obvious. Any such publication schedule would naturally be tight, so unless you had extremely careful planning, a lot of different people involved, and a lot of work done ahead of time, it wasn't doable. It's also an expensive investment and a huge risk. A lot of these issues are being pumped out under the assumption there's going to be a willing audience coming back every single week for however long these books are being published. In the case of 52, that's asking fans to be buying a book every week for a full year. Taking aside the planning that had to go into making 52, anyone who was reading this while it was coming out had to be there every week just to stay on top of everything. But people have lives, stuff happen, they go on vacation, and it's a hell of a commitment for any local comic book store to be that organized with its customers. So it was a huge challenge for everyone, and I can't really speak to that experience. I only really ever read 52 through the trades, and I can't imagine what reading it weekly would have been like, trying to keep up with all the different characters and plot threads going on throughout an entire year. I'm not sure if I would fully appreciate that story, and would have trouble imagining what it would be like reading this thing week to week. If you did experience that, please feel free to share what it was like in the comments section below. But my point of all this is, it's crazy to think about how much of a challenge this presented to publishers, readers, and retailers, and yet the whole crazy project very much seemed to work. They pulled it off. 52 issues were released every week of the year with a damn fine story I'm very much looking forward to talking about. This thing was popular enough to merit spin-off titles for the starring characters. I know for a fact it still sells all the time in the trades, and it's a popular recommendation for new readers that I'll give right now. It's a great series that made me a fan of a lot of the more obscure aspects of DC Comics and characters, firmly pushing me away from the more comfortable stories of the Trinity and Justice League into a whole new world of interesting territory. And it's unmatched in its success in terms of a weekly comic book series ever put out in the modern Western comic book market. DC did try to replicate this magic trick again, first in the widely despised Countdown series, and again in Batman Eternal. Eternal was alright, but lost me fairly early on, and I can't say I've ever looked back on it fondly. Certainly not like 52. So it's important to remember that 52 is truly unique in terms of impact and even sales. Yes, it might not be as deep as Seven Soldiers or as imaginative as Multiversity, but it's instead doing something entirely different from no other DC comic in existence. That goes beyond DC even. Nothing in the whole wide world really compares to 52, behind the scenes and on the page, which I find pretty damn cool. At the home of Dr. Will Magnus, creator of the Metal Men, Booster Gold has come by. He's concerned about his beloved robot partner, Skeets. After all, the hero relies on the small android's knowledge of the future to be a superhero in the present. He is concerned there's something wrong with Skeets after it made an error about Batman, Superman, and Wonder Woman having been due to return to action last week. As well as unable to find anything wrong with Skeets, and is no expert on tomorrow tech as he calls it, Skeets itself insists it must have been just some sort of glitch, because if it wasn't, then that means somebody is messing around with the fabric of time itself. Dr. Magnus bids the two their leave, as he has to go meet with a prisoner named Dr. T.O. Morrill. Magnus is late, and he's the only person who ever visits the man, so he feels obliged not to miss the appointment. Booster Gold goes off to rescue a jet destined to crash, only for Skeets to once again give him the wrong coordinates. The hero is barely able to save the plane in time, and Booster is more alarmed than ever, but Skeets once again assures him that it must be the residual effect of the earlier glitch. The plane is fine, and all is well. And Booster is a bit more reassured when they later have a successful encounter with a villain, and they manage to make a successful bet on a sports game Skeets knew the outcome of. But later, a potential sponsor is arrested on security fraud, even though Skeets predicted the company would be more successful in the future. Following that, Booster Gold is convinced now more than ever that something is wrong with his robot partner, and has Skeets look up everything known about the current whereabouts of Rip Hunter. With some difficulty, they are eventually able to track down the famed time traveler. During the search, Lex Luthor announces the launch of the Everyman Project, a new initiative designed to give superpowers to ordinary citizens as long as they're willing to pay. And once again, Booster Gold is surprised by an event Skeets apparently was unaware of. During all of this, Booster is still careful to continue building his public image, even going so far as to staging an encounter with a villain who he secretly paid off. When they finally track Rip Hunter down, they find a heavily secured remote base, though Skeets is able to hack into the lock thanks to its advanced technology. Inside, Rip is nowhere to be found, though one message in particular stands out. Time is broken. Looking over Rip's notes, which denote someone who's clearly mentally disturbed, he sees that the man has found one person to blame for all of this, none other than Booster Gold. Perplexed, but with no further leads, Booster returns to Metropolis, where he is visited by Ralph Dibney, the elongated man. Dibney is investigating a cult that has begun to worship Superboy since the young man's recent death, but Booster hardly pays the man any attention. Ralph, still mourning the death of his wife, grows frustrated with Booster. He resents the time travel for never warning him about the death of his wife, or Jean Loring, and Ralph accuses Booster of only caring about product placement and himself. Booster scoffs at the elongated man, not viewing him as having any value since he hasn't been active in months, and declares himself Metropolis's new Superman, now that the Man of Steel has gone missing. Suddenly, they hear some mob unrest outside of the LexCorp building this evening. Ralph suggests Booster go and prove he's a real hero. Gold once again saves the day, but in the aftermath, he is accused, on camera, by the villain he paid off, that the earlier stunt was completely fake. Ralph Dibney arrives on the scene and says in front of the press he has every reason to believe Booster is capable of such fraud. In the weeks that followed this disastrous PR moment, Booster's reputation is left in ruins, while a new superhero emerges in Metropolis called Supernova, and rapidly gains the admiration of the city. As his sponsors vanish, Booster is forced to downgrade his apartment, while Skeets admits that the timeline seems to be diverging more and more from what was once recorded history. Though Skeets wants to investigate this, Booster Gold is mostly concerned about learning more about this supernova, and wants to find a way to ensure that Booster is the one that becomes Superman's successor, rather than this new hero. Weeks later, Booster learns of a nuclear submarine that has been transported to Midtown Metropolis by a mythical being. Though eager to prove himself to the public, but overwhelmed by this monster, he's only saved at last minute by Supernova. It's at that point Michael lashes out, attacking the other hero out of frustration, only for Skeets to interrupt the fight with a dire warning. The battle against the monster that brought the submarine here has compromised the integrity of the vessel, and is in danger of exploding. Booster insists he can handle this one on his own. He creates a barrier around the submarine and lifts it up in the air. Happily, Booster declares that he's finally back. As he falls out of the sky, Supernova is able to catch what's left of him. Booster Gold first appeared in his own solo series in February 1986. He was created by legendary comic book artist and writer Dan Jurgens, and was the first major character introduced in the fallout of the Crisis of Infinite Earths. It was a big time in DC comic book history, after essentially uprooting their own canon and firmly shifting the direction of that canon towards the modern age. It wasn't clear what the direction of comics would be going out of the 80s. There was a lot of options out on the table, and the answer wouldn't really come until a year after the premiere of Booster Gold's character, when Booster was depicted joining the Justice League on the pages of the now famous series Justice League International, written by none other than Keith Giffen himself. Booster Gold thus feels like an important choice in which characters 52 chooses to feature. He very much served a similar purpose in the early days immediately following the Crisis of Infinite Earths, so it feels appropriate that he too would usher in the new age that would at least allegedly have followed the Infinite Crisis. It's obviously not a coincidence either that Dan Jurgens and Keith Giffen, the main creative force behind this character as he originated, were both involved in 52. Giffen is credited as doing the art breakdowns, but his creative influence does seem to be felt here and there in the story too. He made for a really interesting partner with Grant Morrison in particular, and it should be noted that's part of the fun of 52, is tracing all the creative effort of all these amazing people involved and figuring out who did what. But 52 is far from perfect either. Booster dies about halfway through, and as we'll discuss later, is also the source of one of the biggest complaints lobbed at the 52. A fairly legitimate complaint at that. That's something we're actually going to discuss in a whole other section of the video, so I want to focus right now more on the character's death. See, this series does a great job with Booster's character overall. It does a good job with all its characters, in fact, but Booster really stands out. What I love about him, and I'm not sure if this is Morrison, Giffen, or somebody like Rucka, but whoever, somebody really nailed how selfish and vain this guy could be. 52 does such a great job at setting this all up with spelling it out to the reader. He's just moving from one accident to the next, not really caring about the people he's saving, the truth behind what's going on, or anything else other than his own image. And you just keep waiting for that shoe to drop. Issue after issue, he indulges in all this selfish behavior, and eventually, the well-deserved comeuppance finally rears its ugly head. At first, it does it really well just by letting Supernova rise in popularity and letting everything go wrong in Booster's life. But then it all goes horribly wrong. If you know superhero comics even a little bit, you probably know that Booster Gold's death isn't real. It's a fake-out, like 100 different comic book deaths that have come before or since. And that's a little disappointing for a series that otherwise is very strong. It gets into the issue that this form of narration has no intention of ever truly ending. It's a challenge nobody has figured out yet, how to write this stuff with a feeling of consequence without crossing into the minefield of tropes and cliches writers have brewed up over the years to get around this wall of non-permanent character deaths. I, like every comic book fan, have a lot of opinions on this, but I don't really think I have any firm solution. I think part of the problem is deaths in these stories are usually a cheap stunt. It kind of is in 52. No matter how you twist things, that's all this Booster Gold death really was, a way to up the stakes and shock people a little bit, in a way I don't think was earned. The fact that Booster Gold is a time traveler should really be the only clue you need to point you in the right direction if you haven't read 52 and are letting me spoil things as we go along through the story. But I have found the details of the fake-out to be pretty clever, all things considered, certainly more than the average comic book death. Yet I think it is worth remarking on the fact that 52 does not solve or truly get around the issue of character death, and the fact that it's very difficult for such moments to have real meaning in the modern world of comic books and superhero stories. 52 is great, and I love it like crazy, but it didn't reinvent the wheel. It's not some magical solution to these ongoing issues in comics. The funny thing about it all, though, is that, perhaps unnoticed by the writers in the heat of a weekly production schedule, in another story within 52, these same writers managed to achieve something they simply could not with Booster Gold, and showcased a character death that actually sticks with me in a big way. One that, though it might not have stuck in canon much, at least I'm never going to forget. But we're going to leave that for next time. This is a very long story, and at the very least I want to kind of do the production in 3 distinct thirds. So this is part 1, and we'll see you guys for part 2 when we start to talk a little bit about the Question. Hey everyone, today we're talking about the Question, Animal Man, and a bunch of other stuff from 52. If you haven't been following our videos concerning this year-long mini-series that ran back in the day, be sure to click on that button in the top corner. And while you're at it, maybe subscribe to Comic Island so you can get all our videos on comic books new and old. In the nation of Kahndaq, Renee Montya is being held captive. These prisons are famously inhumane, and the woman witnesses this firsthand when the guards approach her and attack. So far, these men have just stuck to beating her. They want a confession. They want her to admit to the murder of 9 men that recently occurred in the nation. But Renee and her colleague are innocent. They were framed as part of the work of a criminal organization called Intergang. As she is led to her interrogation, Renee is alarmed when she sees that her colleague's cell is empty, but relieved when some gas appears. When the guards mistake it for smoke, a voice speaks out, correcting them. It's called binary gas. Renee is glad to see Charlie, and he is happy to see her too. After all, they are in this together. Hiding out in Kahndaq, the two spend the next week regrouping and recovering in a shipping container the Question had sent over from Gotham. The situation isn't ideal, and Renee begins to regret ever agreeing to work with this vigilante. They found each other after they and the superhero known as Batwoman discovered a plan by Intergang to invade and take over Gotham City using their extensive resources. It suddenly occurs to her what Intergang's next move will be and why they are targeting this nation. Today, the leader of Kahndaq, Black Adam, is set to marry his bride-to-be, a woman named Isis, and the terrorist organization is planning on attacking the wedding, as they view Black Adam as a threat. After all, this villain has recently taken a very proactive stance in justice across the world, and Intergang feels he will be a huge obstacle once they seize Gotham City. The two rush to the site of the wedding, though they still have to keep a low profile due to their now fugitive status. The wedding is being attended by Captain Marvel and the rest of the Marvel family at Billy Batson's behest, as Billy believes that his longtime enemy has a real chance at redemption here. The ceremony commences with a show of powerful, magical lightning. Among the astonished crowd, Renee and Charlie desperately look around for any sign of Intergang activity. To the rogue GCPD officer's shock, she spots a young child prepared to detonate a series of explosives strapped to her chest. Renee is unable to push through the crowd to stop the child, and though she is unwilling to do so at first, Charlie has her shoot the girl rather than allow for the slaughter of the massive crowd attending the wedding. In the hours that follow, Charlie repeatedly tries to reassure Renee had no choice in the matter, but it's of no comfort to the dead girl. That night, as Black Adam and Isis enjoy their first night together as a married couple, the staff quietly clean the child's blood from the ground. In honor of their efforts, Black Adam arranges for the pardon of the Question and Montoya, and prepares a ceremony to reward their heroic efforts. Charlie is present for it, always happy to have more friends, but Renee neglects to even show up. Black Adam is insulted at this move, but Charlie explains to the powerful leader that Renee feels particularly guilty about what happened. When Teth Adam angrily points out Renee had no other choice, that the girl would have killed many people and intended on decimating the wedding, Charlie replies that Montoya simply doesn't see it that way, and is coping how she usually does. Confronting the woman, Black Adam finds her drunk and yells at Montoya, only for her to taunt the man even further. He grabs her by the neck, and Renee tearfully begs the man to end her suffering. And this is only stopped by Isis, who points out that the woman's grief and her husband's anger are driving this argument. Charlie agrees, arguing that no amount of celebration can cover up the simple fact that a girl tried to blow herself up in the middle of a crowd. But it's the fault of the Intergang, and they must be stopped. And to that, Black Adam agrees. The group is able to discover an Intergang re-education camp, where a brother of Isis is being held. The boy has just tried to break out of prison, so the leader of the camp orders that this boy, Amon, be never given the chance to run again, by destroying his legs, starting at the ankle. Watching this from the shadows, Renee wants to intervene, but Charlie stops her. Black Adam and Isis are on their way, and working together, they can stop these monsters. Two ordinary humans cannot. It's difficult, but if the two crime fighters go down there, they will die. There are some things you just have to accept. Not long after this, Black Adam and Isis do indeed arrive, quickly taking down the Intergang cell. Renee is injured in the fray, but Isis is able to heal her thanks to her magical abilities gifted to her by Black Adam. They are able to recover the powerful woman's brother, and though she can heal his flesh, the boy will never walk again. So Black Adam approaches Amon and explains to the boy that Teth Adam is now married to Isis. By right, he and Amon are now brothers by marriage. They have a bond, and to Teth Adam that means everything. So he asks Amon to recite his new brother's name. With all his remaining strength, Amon manages to stutter out the words, Black Adam. With the matter of Intergang resolved, the now established Black Marvel family, grateful for the assistance of Renee and Charlie, agreed to take the two to the Himalayas, miles away from any civilized society, but feel surprised by this request and indebted to these vigilantes. Black Adam promises they will always be welcome in Kahndaq, while Amon, now going by the codename Osiris, points out he never would have walked again were it not for these two. Finally, Isis says they gave the family a gift of friendship, saved their wedding day, and most significantly, brought her brother home. She wishes for Charlie to always have more questions to ask, and Renee to find the answers she clearly needs. Montoya replies that the only thing she wants to know at the moment is how to stop Intergang from invading Gotham. Isis suggests that if that is the case, she might not be asking the right questions. The woman creates a rose and gives it to her friend, asking, "Who is Renee Montya?" With that, the Black Marvel family leaves, and in the middle of nowhere in the snowy mountainous range, the two are greeted by friends of Charlie. Charlie introduces Renee to Richard Dragon, the man who taught him everything, and as of now, Montoya's teacher too. The group goes to the hidden land of Nanda Parbat, and time stops. Days, weeks, months, it all suddenly becomes unclear to Renee, whose life becomes an endless, difficult, and brutal routine. As for Charlie, he coughs, and coughs, and coughs. It started just after they arrived here. The man is sick and not getting better. As a smoker herself, she recognizes what is happening. And one day, she finally has the nerve to ask Charlie when he quit. He admits that clearly it wasn't soon enough, and states he only has 7 months to live. Suddenly, this partnership of theirs, the purpose of it, their journey here, and Renee's path forward, it all becomes very clear. So she asks Charlie why, out of 8 billion people on this planet, he chose her. That's the question, isn't it? The Question, real name Charles Victor Saz, was created by legendary comic book artist Steve Ditko and first appeared in 1967 as part of Charlton Comics. Eventually, these characters would be acquired by DC and brought into their universe in the early 1980s, as many other characters in DC's roster were over the years. Ditko originally used The Question as a vehicle for his own political views and philosophy, with a strong emphasis on his own libertarian and objectivist beliefs, which were, in turn, largely informed by Ayn Rand. And while I personally disagree with that political view, this is Ditko we're talking about, so they are artfully done and present their point of view in a very interesting way, even if I don't always agree with what he's saying. Once The Question was brought over into DC, they kind of skewed this issue by giving him a more Zen-like philosophy, something that had been established before 52, but is still very much present here. The old politics of The Question that were once so heavily associated with the character, by the time of 52 had long faded away. So while I would argue it's worth having a debate about whether or not that's a good idea in the larger sense of the big sage character, those sorts of politics wouldn't really fit with the overall tone and aspirations of 52 itself anyways, so avoiding it makes sense here. Because 52 is not a very political book. It has some political attributes and references, sure, but at its very core, it's not about politics or philosophy or any of the usual larger points fronted by Grant Morrison in his other works. That's not a criticism of the book, simply an observation. The purposes of 52 are largely a number of different, simpler goals. One, to orient new readers into a wider, deeper, and weirder world of DC beyond the top-shelf, best-known superheroes, and 2, to deliver an emotionally cognizant experience. So, it's not a political book, but it's a very emotional one, because I really feel and love the journey these characters go on throughout 52. The whole dynamic of Charles connecting with Renee and gradually passing the torch over to her over the course of a year that this comic takes place is really some moving stuff, and in my eyes really cemented Renee as an interesting character with a history worth exploring. It's a true shame a lot of this particular aspect of canon gets muddled in DC present day, because I fell in love with these characters thanks to this story. But it's not just them either. I really connected with Black Adam and his family, as well as Steel and his niece Natasha. The scientist, Dibney, and the space crew, all these characters we haven't talked about yet, They all have some great moments. This comic does an uncanny job at getting you to really connect with all of these characters, so that when things start to happen to them, when people die, you really feel that pain, even if you know it's not going to be permanent, as I was talking about earlier. This is why I think 52 is somewhat divisive. There are people who really don't like this comic, and I'm certainly not one of them, but it does make sense to me. Something that is so primarily emotional is going to hinge very heavily on whether or not you connect with it, and whether or not that's going to happen is going to be determined on subjective grounds. And with something this complicated and dense, well, it was never going to connect with everyone, so it makes sense that not everyone loves this story. Because I did connect with it, I really felt it. I felt the loss of Charlie and so many others when they fall, and on the other hand, you feel their victories just as strongly. The other side of that is this is also a particularly dark story if you somehow haven't noticed yet. Kids are killed, Dibney's suicidal at the beginning of this thing. Again, if you connect with things, the dark tone is easily navigated and actually informs a lot of the losses that we feel along the way. On the other hand, if you don't connect with it, I imagine it would be a pretty miserable experience. In the depths of space, Lobo, Starfire, Animal Man, and Adam Strange, all stranded there as a result of the Infinite Crisis, are investigating a mysterious force that is reducing entire solar systems to dust. Worse still, whatever is carving this path of destruction is heading straight to Earth. The creators of the Green Lantern Corps, known as the Guardians of the Universe, can sense it too. Machines, the scale of which there are no adequate words to describe. They shatter planets before their followers emerge on inhabited worlds in the billions, to chant the creed of their mistress, the Lady Styx. Where her army passes, it grows, with millions of new captives forcibly remade into her never-ending army. Believe in her, they scream. Believe in her, they chant. The Guardians order the recall of their Green Lanterns, for they cannot risk this containment spreading any further. But the adventuring group of Earthborn heroes aren't so wary, and know they are the only chance at stopping this force from reaching their home. With things looking bleak, and a new opportunity to return to Earth, they offer Buddy Baker, the Animal Man, a chance to go back to his family. But Baker correctly asserts that his family is the one in danger to begin with, if Lady Styx is allowed to run unchecked towards their home. So though he might be scared, like the rest of them, they have no choice. They must stop this. Of course, nobody said it was going to be easy, but they do have an idea for that, and it's a pretty good one. Lobo is a bounty hunter, and Lady Styx would pay a considerable bounty for the group. Head on against an army, they stand no chance. But who knows what kind of damage they can do in the belly of the beast. The plan works surprisingly well, and the team is able to overpower Lady Styx, and in the words of Lobo, explode her good. But it is not without cause. The Animal Man was hit with a neurotoxin and is unable to recover. As he lay dying, he tells the others not to worry. His family already knows how much he loves them, and he can see them right now. They're cheering the team on. The universe likes Buddy. It always has. So he has only one last request for Starfire, to promise not to let him come back as a zombie. And so ends the tale of the Animal Man. Meanwhile, Lex Luthor has become a popular figure thanks to his Everyman project. The program has been successful, with Luthor fronting his own team of superheroes called Infinity Incorporated, all handpicked by Lex as part of a team of heroes directly under Luthor's control, while many normal citizens are enjoying having access to their own superpowers for the first time. With so many wary of these heroes in the wake of the Infinite Crisis, it's of great comfort to them that this power is now in the hands of the people. However, as the year comes to an end, Lex begins feeling threatened by a new superhero rising in popularity, infuriatingly uninvolved with the Everyman project, a mysterious man going by the codename Supernova. This, coupled with news that Lex himself cannot benefit from his own project due to genetic issues, compels Luthor to stage a disaster and level the blame at Supernova's feet. As people all around Metropolis count down to the start of the new year, Lex prepares to shut off the powers of the hundreds of people he has granted enhanced abilities to over the last several months.
3, 2, 1.
Flying heroes plummet from the sky, their energy triggering explosions as they hit the ground, with enough force to erupt gas lines, creating even further widespread destruction. In the ensuing chaos, Natasha Irons, niece of the superhero known as Steel and member of Infinity Incorporated, is relieved to see her and her team still have powers. As they rush to help citizens, Natasha can't help wonder, though, why that might be. And as Supernova flies ahead, she wonders if this mysterious hero and her uncle were right to be suspicious of Lex Luthor all along. Without a doubt, one of my favorite aspects of 52 is its ability to show off some of the more obscure DC characters. With new versions of the Question, Batwoman, and Steel being floated around, while simultaneously making these incredible developments among long-established characters ranging from Tio Moro to Will Magnus, and clear favorites of Grant Morrison like Animal Man also being featured. We get this wonderful buffet of characters new and old. This is why 52, though a long-ass series, is absolutely a recommendation of mine when it comes to new DC fans. It asks a lot out of you and not everything might make sense, but they make the story very fun and interesting while informing you of plenty of little details about the DC universe and its history along the way. I consider 52 essential reading now for characters like Black Adam and The Question in particular. Originally, this story was meant to be sort of just a content bridge, explaining and going over the many changes that resulted from the Trinity walking away from their superhero roles for a full year. But it becomes more than that. A clear statement from DC of change without abandoning old ideas either. Though it had a lot of issues when it comes to the follow-up of this little blueprint they sort of created out of 52, I find the blueprint itself very rock solid, especially in how it works with these characters, even as it navigates some remarkably dark and bleak waters. I often say my issue isn't with their content so much as my standards for that content are much higher than lighthearted stuff, and 52 is a prime example of dark DC stuff done at least relatively well, enough so that it can be enjoyed. Though we'll talk more about the limitations of that later, and it wasn't something new at the time. Rather, it's a clear endorsement of something I'm a lot more neutral towards, something DC had already been doing for nearly 2 decades by the time 52 came out. DC was changing for the modern age. And that's it for part 2. Next up, we'll be going over World War III and the end of 52. Thanks for watching, guys, and we'll see you next time here on Comic Island. Early into the year following the events of the Infinite Crisis, Dr. Will Magnus, best known as the creator of the Metal Men, was kidnapped by the Intergang at the behest of the villain Egg Fu. The Doctor was taken to Oolong Island, where he and other famous scientists were forced to create weapons for the villainous organization. Dubbed the Science Squad, among their priorities was to target Black Adam, long considered a threat to Intergang, and so the Science Squad created beings they called the Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse to deal with this threat. The results were devastating. Amon was tricked into befriending a sentient crocodile named Sobek, who initially worked with the Black Adam family. He had Amon depower himself in front of the being, and the creature devoured the boy alive. Though he and the other horsemen fell before the might of Black Adam, Isis was also killed in the fray. As she died in Tethadam's arms, she had one final request for her husband: to avenge them all. In Egypt, Captain Marvel begs Black Adam to calm down and tell the other heroes what he wants. But the man has lost reason and is beyond words. He's killed millions and has no interest in stopping. In the neighboring nation of Biala, at the behest of the Horsemen, it is made to appear the country was responsible for these events, so Tethadam slaughtered every man, woman, and child living there. Allies and enemies of Kahndaq soon escalate things into open warfare between each other. The superheroes of the world are left to grapple with the mounting chaos, as villains take delight in the events, and many use the attack as an opportunity to go on a crime spree. So send soldiers, send armies. The Doom Patrol, Martian Manhunter, Father Time, the Justice Society, Titans, and even Donna Troy, who assumes the mantle of Wonder Woman. One by one, all fall before the unstoppable Black Adam, with many being killed along the way. Every major faction in Earth scrambles to put up some sort of means to defend themselves from Black Adam, who continues rampaging around the world. When he arrives in China, the country is quick to forbid other superheroes from entering its borders, even threatening outright war if anyone disobeys, and privately going so far as to consider nuclear attack on the rest of the world out of sheer desperation. They attempt to handle the villain alone, but in the time it took for you to hear all of this, Black Adam slaughtered their troops and even their own superhero team, the Grand Ten. One of the few survivors of this attack, August General Iron, having lost contact with Beijing, authorizes the superheroes of the world to assist, knowing they have no chance otherwise. Desperate to stop the conflict, Captain Marvel petitions the Egyptian gods who created Black Adam to rescind Tethadam's powers, but they refuse, openly blessing his actions. Hero after hero fall before the villain until finally, Captain Marvel moves in with one final plan. With a well-timed telepathic attack from the Martian Manhunter, who overwhelms Black Adam with memories of Martian civilization being destroyed, Billy Batson successfully hits Black Adam with a bolt of magical lightning, guided by other mystical superheroes. In a devastating blow, Tethadam falls to Earth. Though he calls out the word Shazam again and again, nothing happens. For these days, Captain Marvel is the guardian of magic, and with it comes new abilities. So though Black Adam's powers couldn't be taken away, the magic word to unlock it has been changed to one only Billy Batson knows, and that he believes Tethadam will never, ever be able to guess. Though World War III in the world of DC was only a fraction of the length of its predecessors, it is appropriately named. With numerous countries descending into chaos and open military action, countless millions dead at Black Adam's hands. In the twilight days of the New 52 run, World War III is a truly heartbreaking final, epic blowout to Black Adam's story. With 4 additional issues published as a sort of tie-in depicting some of the fighting and chaos during World War III, and an ending to Black Adam's story that to this day I just find so haunting. It's this part of the story that really stands out in my memory as the emotional crux of the entire 52 run. The writers of 52 do a great job at really getting you to fall in love with the Black Adam family, only for this family to be horribly and brutally killed, with the most innocent among them targeted. It hurts to read and watch it all unfold, and makes Black Adam's deadly retaliation, while morally unjustifiable, very cathartic. You can really feel Black Adam's rage and frustration. And because he's a being who's basically Superman with all the additional powers of magic in general, but also all the powers of any given Shazam family member, they really let him lean into his powers and cut loose for this story. It results in some of my favorite parts of all of 52, right up there with some of the stuff concerning the Question and Booster Gold we've already covered. It also to me represents the positive side of what 52 was kind of all about, and that's modernization. A key part of the early 2000s in comics was truly firming up and finding a balance between the lighter, much more kid-oriented elements of DC's early history and the more sophisticated, adult-oriented comics that started taking over the company since the 1980s. It has been a long and difficult struggle for DC, Marvel, and other franchises as they navigate these untested cultural waters. And to this day it remains an issue that hasn't been completely sorted or figured out. And in all of this, 52 is perhaps the example I most regularly see cited and used when people talk about modernization in Action Comics. It's not the start or end of this modernization, but it is a prime example of it. Modernization can be very useful in taking an already cool and pretty dark villain like Black Adam, and really fleshing out some of his character work and development, giving him a deeper and more meaningful history, but most importantly of all, letting him finally and truly unleashing his full power in a way no other villain really has had the chance to do before on Earth. Certainly not like this, not to this level, in the way where we're clearly meant to understand and feel exactly how we got to this point and why he's doing all these things, and also seeing all this destruction so explicitly. Like I said, I certainly understand why Black Adam is acting this way, even if I don't, personally approve. In the case of Black Adam, and even the events of World War III, this is how modern stuff can work well. It is edgy as hell and very dark, but not a miserable or overly depressing experience, at least not in my opinion. It's epic, and almost 15 years after the fact, still feels like a really bold and brave story for DC to have told. Black Adam truly became a superhero, and his family was devoured alive. And in turn, slaughtered children, killed superheroes, and rampaged across the earth. It really is one of my favorite character arcs in comic book history. The thing is, though, Black Adam is kind of the opposite side of how modernization is usually discussed in the context of 52. Because while Teth Adam's story, in my opinion, is an example of modernization in a more positive sense, usually people bring up 52 to discuss the more negative side of modernizing superheroes. And the most common example used in 52 when talking about modernization is Mr. Mind. In 1943, Fawcett Comics created Captain Marvel, Mr. Mind, and numerous other characters from the Captain Marvel family. These comics represent a huge part of early superhero history, and at their height, even outsold Superman. But over time, sales dropped, the company stopped making comics, and the characters were eventually purchased by DC. Due to Marvel eventually taking ownership of the Captain Marvel name, DC would go on to rename their superhero Shazam, as most people know him now thanks to the feature film. But the point being, this classic Golden Age character Mr. Mind went from looking like this in his original form to this in 52. Late in the game of this story, we learned that Booster Gold actually survived his apparent death and was working with Rip Hunter to expose and defeat his seemingly helpful drone Skeets, who is revealed to actually have been Mr. Mind all along. It reflects the larger patterns of Grant Morrison's writing body as a whole, bringing these obscure Golden Age superhero characters into the spotlight and making them totally terrifying in the process. When it comes to how Grant Morrison, or even other writers like Geoff Johns, Mark Waid, or Greg Rucka work, all of these writers have a history of taking older ideas and really putting fun or interesting modern spins on everything. So I actually find myself not truly that put off by Mr. Mind being turned into this monstrosity, especially knowing that nothing ever really stops anyone from bringing the old version back in another story or another version along if they so desire. Comics are and kinda should be free and liberal like that. It doesn't seem like that big a deal to me. Nostalgia aside, there really isn't any value in endlessly preserving or revering old books or characters that were created and largely designed to sell chewing gum to children that by now are long dead, by the way. I think the value and point in continuing to tell these stories and use these characters is to try new things and to push these characters in new directions, especially as our culture changes and grows over time. That's kind of what Grant Morrison's career is all about, and I applaud him for it. But it's true of 52 and its other associated writers as well. This is what Geoff Johns and Mark Waid do. Where I give way and agree a little bit with criticisms of modernization is in other corners of 52 or the DC comics that exist around this story. Little things like how World War III turns into a bit of a slugfest in its own miniseries, or how Ralph Dibney's character is a bit of a depressing nightmare in the first little bit of 52, hints that the larger DC universe was suffering from some problems that would only get worse as the company, at this point, was barreling towards the direction of the now infamous 2010 publication line called The New 52, named after 52 for a reason, by the way. As much as 52 is also kind of setting up another later event called Final Crisis, I think this is also a real precursor to the New 52 more than anything else, especially given that 52 is full of hints that the DC multiverse is returning after it was destroyed back in the 1980s during the Crisis of Infinite Earths. This is rambly for those that don't know DC details and little bits of history, but my point being, there are weaknesses to 52, ones that people don't often talk about. The bigger thing that we're kind of getting at too here is that beyond 52 itself, there's this bigger story of modernization going on within the company, and that's where the real problem lies. It's one thing when you have these stories in the hands of talented writers like those involved in 52. But when things get handed over to less talented people, or when there's less attention given to these stories or characters, well, that's when the problems of modernization start to really crop up. That's when DC started to get more superficial and began transforming into some sort of gross edgelord that often defined it during the days of New 52. I would argue this has a lot less to do with 52 itself, but rather the editors at DC misunderstanding what was successful and great about 52 to begin with. When we look at some of the other weekly comics DC would try out later, and their behavior with telling stories in general. I think they tended to overvalue the size and scale of 52 instead of the much more memorable and important aspects that made this story great, the stuff that involves character work and well-structured, carefully crafted storytelling. That's missing in stuff like Countdown or Batman Eternal, and it really shows when you look at how people talk about these different stories. It's in the scenes with Renee and the Question, or Black Adam and his family, the ones that to me stand out the most in 52 for this very reason, and why ultimately the whole story is a success. Too often I think that gets lost in the world of modern comics. It's not so much that they can't be about darker things, it's that you need to handle these darker things more maturely if you want to tell a mature story. Context, structure, emotional value, 52 has all of it, and too many stories in DC films or in the new 52 simply do not. There's nothing wrong with a modern comic or story any more than a throwback classic one. What matters is how the story, in both cases, is told. And as is my central thesis of this video, to date, no story has been told quite like 52. It might not be the deepest story in the world, and at times it certainly can be a little broad or clumsy, but I have had just about as much fun revisiting 52 as I did reading it the first time around. And yes, though it very much did pave the way for the new 52 like I talked about, and that does have a lot of problems and it made plenty of mistakes, it's interesting coming back to the story after Scott Snyder, now in the early 2020s, has restored the DC multiverse to a level even more writer-friendly than what existed before the Crisis of Infinite Earths. 52 very much did lead to DC making a lot of horrible choices and mistakes along the way, but it also allowed for so many brilliant moments and this bright future we now find ourselves in. This future kind of reflects the little history lesson we've been telling throughout this video, too, one of which characters from many different worlds and companies all found themselves under the umbrella of DC Comics over the years. In 52, it's a clear, deliberate choice to feature characters from DC's personal roster, like Booster Gold, as well as those that have come over from Carlton, like The Question, and Fawcett, like the Captain Marvel family. Like DC's in-story multiverse, it works well in telling the story of a larger, shared universe, with these linked but otherwise independent stories all existing in the same shared space. That is a world of endless potential, where you can do so much with so many different things. In many ways, 52 is kind of the story of comics as a whole, just showing the entire publication line in action across one series over the course of a single year, in universe but also in our reality too, telling both stories side by side. So I know I'm glomming onto this story really hard, but I think there's a lot of great things to like about 52, and hopefully I've helped illustrate that along the way. Upon discovering his wife's desecrated grave, Ralph Dibney sets out on a journey to resurrect Susan at any cost. However, numerous failed attempts at resurrecting her and a journey through various afterlives not only proved fruitless, but also nearly unleashed the villainous immortal called Felix Faust and a demon. In the end, Ralph was forced to sacrifice himself to trap the two beings, and upon passing away, he was reunited with his wife. Now ghosts, the two set out to do what they do best, and find themselves a good mystery. Natasha eventually discovers Lex Luthor's crimes, but he's able to give himself superpowers after learning his employees lied to him out of fear of what Lex would do with these new abilities. Giving himself the powers of Superman, Luthor nearly pummels Natasha to death until the arrival of her uncle. Together they defeat Luthor, and he is arrested. Somewhere in the streets of a bustling city, Tet the Dam walks alone, unnoticed by anyone, muttering random words to himself in the hopes of figuring out what the new magic word Billy Batson chose might be. Dr. Will Magnus is eventually rescued and returned home, where he is able to restore the original Skeets for a relieved Booster Gold. In space, Animal Man is resurrected by Grant Morrison nonsense and given upgraded powers, but is pursued by assassins seeking to avenge Lady Styx. As everyone arrives on Earth, the assassins move in to attack the Baker family, but luckily, they are killed by Starfire. 1 year after the start of 52, more superheroes are turning up everywhere once again, as the wounds of the Infinite Crisis finally begin to heal. In Gotham City, the new Question restores the Bat Signal, for she has work to do, but she doesn't have to go alone. She only has one question. Are you ready? Unheard by all, a secret message from the Void whispers. The secret of 52 is that the multiverse still exists.